Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Amarachi Ubani.
And I'm Millicent Walker. First, the headlines. Russian and Ukrainian delegations meet face-to-face in Istanbul. Moscow says it will fundamentally cut back offensive operations near Kyiv and Chernihiv.
Moscow offers neutrality in exchange for security guarantees, proposes resolving dispute over Crimea within 15 years via bilateral negotiations. Plus, the Kremlin dismisses reports that Chelsea owner and Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich was poisoned earlier this month as information war. Welcome again. Ukrainian and Russian negotiators have been holding the first face-to-face meeting between the sides in more than 2 weeks amid Russia's invasion of its neighbor, now in the 5th week.
The Russian delegation announced 2 steps to de-escalate the conflict. Moscow says it will fundamentally cut back offensive operations near Kyiv and Chernihiv, while Kyiv offered neutrality in exchange for security guarantees. Let's take a look at the highlight of the talks and other developments on ground in Ukraine.
Following in-person talks between Russia and Ukraine in Istanbul, Moscow says it will drastically reduce military activity on 2 fronts, Kyiv and Chernihiv, in order to boost mutual trust. The news that Russian forces will reduce their activity around Chernihiv will certainly be welcomed by the estimated 140,000 people who remain trapped in the city, effectively surrounded by the invading troops. Residents and officials have accused Russia of deliberately targeting civilian buildings and infrastructure, damaging or destroying hospitals, schools and countless residential blocks. Hours before the announcement, further shelling was reported in the city. On its part, Ukraine's negotiators say it will adopt neutral status in return for security guarantees, meaning it will not join any military alliances such as NATO or host military bases. The Ukrainian presidential advisor also says enough progress was made during the talks in Istanbul to allow Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to meet. Turkey says the moves mark the most significant progress since the war began. Chelsea owner and Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich was part of the meetings. Russia says the suspected poisoning of Abramovich earlier this month is not true, with Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov calling it part of information war. And on the ground, a strike on a government building in the southern port city of Mykolaiv is said to have killed at least 7 people and injured 22. The city governor, Vitaly Kim, who posted a striking image of the damaged building, was not in the building at the time. He said he'd overslept. Meanwhile, UK's Ministry of Defence says Russian troops had been pushed back from a number of positions to the northwest of Kyiv. In other developments, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has addressed the Danish parliament, saying what is happening in Mariupol amounts to crimes against humanity.
The occupiers have killed civilians even when they were simply trying to save themselves. Among our displaced people in Europe as well as in our western regions, there are children that were picked up from the roadside standing next to the dead bodies of their parents. In our city of Mariupol, which for more than 3 weeks has been blocked by Russian troops, around 100,000 people remain.
With a growing sense of shock and horror, the free world has watched the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And here in Denmark, we are following the events in your country very closely. We feel heartfelt sympathy for the Ukrainian people, and your leadership, President, in defending your country commands the greatest respect.
Mariupol has seen the worst of Russia's aggression in Ukraine, with tens of thousands of civilians trapped under unrelenting bombardment and shelling, with no electricity, running water or gas. With the city surrounded by the invading forces, people have no safe way out. Even evacuation routes have been targeted. UN aid agencies say they've managed to help up to 900,000 people in Ukraine so far, but they must be guaranteed safe passage by the warring parties to be able to do more.
Across Ukraine, the United Nations and our partners have managed to reach up to 900,000 vulnerable people with life-saving aid since the 24th of February. That's good, but it's still far from enough. We continue to scale up and position our relief operation, but we must be guaranteed safe passage by parties to the fighting, as we cannot deliver aid when shelling continues and roads are mined. We count on the continued cooperation of all parties to protect civilians and humanitarian supplies and personnel.
An estimated 3.7 million people have fled to neighboring countries, while more than 6.5 million have been displaced inside Ukraine since the Russian invasion began February 24.
Well, joining us now, security analyst Temitope Olodo and international affairs analyst Dele Ogun both join us from London for more on the situation in Ukraine. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us on the program. I'd like to begin with you, Temitope, your thoughts on Russia's promise to scale down military operations around Kyiv and northern Ukraine.
I think it's a welcome development. A lot of us have been watching with horror what has happened with the humanitarian disaster, with many kids losing their life, many areas which are meant to be, areas that are no-go areas in areas of conflict have been destroyed, lives have been destroyed. So it's a welcome development that Russia has decided to scale back their offensive, against, those areas, within Ukraine. And so it's a welcome development. And at the end of the day, I think almost all the countries of the world have been calling for negotiation, a peace exit point out of this conflict. So it is a welcome development to many of us that are watching around the world.
Well, some feel that Russia is sort of softening its stance on this war in Ukraine. Do you totally agree with this? And this is regardless of what they said over the weekend about focusing on the Donbass area.
There are two schools of thought on this. Some believe that the approach adopted by Russia is more or less to regain.
I guess we've lost him. Mr. Ogun, let's hear your thoughts on this. And I know that we've talked about this before, what Russia wants out of this war. And now Russia is saying it would scale down military operations in Kyiv and in northern Ukraine. We're talking about cities like Chernihiv and so on. What do you think?
Well, let me begin by saying, is this not the most stupid war ever? What Ukraine is now saying that it's ready to agree to be a neutral zone and not to join the gang up against Russia. Is that not what Russia was asking for in the first instance, before the first missile, the first bullet was fired? And the talk that Russia is changing its agenda, I've read some of the narrative. Of course, it presupposes that we believe what NATO was saying in the first instance, that Russia was looking to colonize Ukraine. I mean, everybody knows that when it comes to matters like this, this would be top secret material as far as the Russians concerned in terms of their agenda in Ukraine. So what NATO did was to blow up and play up the Russian agenda that they wanted to swallow Ukraine, such that when the Russians now say we've achieved what we sought to achieve, and we had no interest in taking Kiev, they can now start making the alternative noise that the Russians, because of the support that they provided to Ukraine, the Russians are now scaling back. But the peace talks is always going to be welcome to all civilized peoples. It was a matter of regret that this ever had to come to this level, but there have been so many casualties, not just to Ukrainians. We should list amongst the casualties of this war this concept of the free world that they like using, as against the captive world, the still enslaved world, that has been blown to pieces because we've now seen the limits of their freedom. Massive constraints on freedom of information because they wanted us and their people to swallow the narrative. The other casualty is truth. Truth has been savaged and damaged by this propaganda and information war that has been pushed. List amongst the other casualties, globalization. The trust has gone. If we now live in a world where we know that if the Western powers do not like what you're doing, they will simply unplug you. They will disconnect you from the system and from the networks that the world was supposed to be sharing. And the final casualty, as far as I see it, is race relations. This war has highlighted the racial barriers like never before, such that it's very much now the West against the rest. The peace talks are welcome. The war should never have happened in the first instance because what Russia was insisting upon was that Ukraine should remain neutral and not join NATO. And is that now what we gathered around to discuss?
I hear you when you say, this war should have never happened. And now looking with hindsight, I'm sure that many world leaders realize that. But the Ukrainian president has addressed parliaments in Europe, also addressed the US Senate as well. And he's been hailed, for standing his ground for Ukraine resisting the Russian forces. Would you call him a hero? Do you think that, he's come out of this a hero of some sort?
He's come out as the comedian that he was from the beginning. That was his background. And he's come out as a big joke because that, of course, they will all be cheering him in their parliaments because they simply used the Ukrainian people. They slaughtered and sacrificed the Ukrainians. For what purpose? In order to attack Russia. They didn't have the courage to attack Russia directly, but they engineered a proxy war whereby little Ukraine will stand up to big, powerful nuclear-armed Russia because they were pouring in the weapons and pouring in the money and pouring in the propaganda behind it. So he's come out as a complete idiot, as far as I'm concerned, wasted the lives of so many of his people to come back to where we started in the first instance, which is Ukraine, your sovereign country, remain neutral, will respect your neutrality, but you cannot join that gang up against Russia, which NATO is. And they've been completely used, and the Ukrainian people are the most unfortunate victims of the whole exercise.
I beg to differ, though, with Deleogun on the part where he talked about comedians and, that perhaps affecting the decision that Zelensky took. But we've since been joined by Temitope Olodo again. Thanks for joining us. But you heard a few things that Deleogun talked about, and the neutrality that Zelensky says is on the table, and saying that it's a silly war in the first place. What are your thoughts on what he said?
I think there are many schools of thought on this, but let's not kid ourselves. This war should not have happened in the first place because NATO had no intention of having Ukraine as part of them. They will not even meet the requirement of NATO if we want to be sincere with ourselves. And just like Mr. Deleogun has actually said, the bottom line is we've not seen one bomb or one missile dropped on Russia's soil, because if you had dropped on Russia's soil, then we could have said these are people of equal military might fighting each other. All the casualty, all the activities have happened in Ukraine. Of course, Russia has lost some people. Just like if the United States have decided to invade Nigeria, they will lose people coming on ground. They will lose weapons coming on ground. But all the incident will be happening on the Nigerian soil, not in America, which is exactly what has happened here. I think, just like he said, and which I agree with, I think what we need now is to have peace. But again, we need to ask ourselves what is really going to happen at the end of the day, because Russia annexed that part of, Ukraine, which they are planning to annex. And will anybody actually voice against it, come against it, and say no, we don't want that to happen? Now, will Ukraine no, proceed with that threat that they will turn into a guerrilla war? No, that is the next stage that we need to be looking at. My hope is that we could find a peaceful resolution, just like the Turkish president has said, that maybe the two leaders could meet, and at least that could help to create that buffer and corridor for people to come out. People that are stuck in Mariupol. The 160,000 people that are stuck there. Trying to survive. Those are the kind of things we should be looking at now, and I hope peace will reign in that part of the world. But again, I think it's important to highlight that African countries also need to look at what is happening now and start within the continent, develop their internal trade, develop their strong ties, stop taking our money overseas, because we know what will happen if they're not happy with anything we're doing in Africa. They will block those money, they will use our money to develop their country, and that's the end of it.
Let me come back to you, Mr. Ogun, and that is what Ukraine expects, security guarantees. And then we have, of course, the U.S. Secretary of State saying that there are no signs of seriousness coming from the Russian side with this negotiations. I mean, if Ukraine is already offering neutrality, why hasn't the war ended?
It hasn't ended because America doesn't want it to end. NATO does not want it to end. It was always a proxy war. Their agenda was to use little Ukraine to bleed Russia militarily and financially. That was their agenda. So they've been using Ukraine. So it's a joke for them, the puppet masters, standing behind saying the puppet is not talking peace, or the other side is not talking peace, is because they are not listening. They weren't listening from the beginning. Putin told them, we told you these were our red lines. You didn't listen. You took in Lithuania, you took in other smaller countries that were formerly part of the USSR zone of influence. And whereas you had promised all along that you would not take 1 inch eastwards. Instead, you've taken a mile eastwards, and you're right on our borders. So, peace, the war would never have begun. Let's make this clear. The war would never have started in the first instance if NATO was not involved, if NATO was not standing behind Ukraine and egging the Ukrainian leadership on. The war would have ended weeks ago for the same reason, if NATO and America were not standing behind the Ukrainians. It has continued as long as it has, and it will continue as long as it will, as long as NATO and America are poking their nose in the business.
Now that we're at this point, and this question is for both of you, gentlemen, now that we're at this point where, we're gradually seeing the end of the war, because it looks like it right now, with leaders, finally sitting to talk, and the Russian foreign minister saying that the last lap of the talks will be President Putin and President Zelensky sitting at the table to face each other, to have this conversation. Do you think that there are any regrets on either side over this war?
Well, I think there are regrets all round. Sorry, go ahead, my colleague.
Yeah, I think there are regrets. Russians will look back at the way in which they have fought this war. Of course, they're not losing. They have lost a lot of materials. They've lost people along the line, but they've also exhibited their weakness. So it's like somebody fighting Tyson, and Tyson taking 7 rounds before knocking out the other opponent. The people waiting by the side could see where the weaknesses are. So some part of Russia have been, their military might have been revealed. Weaknesses in their military might have been revealed, and they need to go back and look at it. I think for Ukraine, they need to look back and say, okay, actually we thought the West would come to our aid, but all they did was to say, take these weapons and fight this war on your own terms. Now it's not benefited them. They've destroyed their country. They are now going to be giving money, and those money they have to pay back. Britain was paying back, even to the United States for the Second World War. So they are in debt. This is capitalism in reality, 101. So there is no winner in this war. Of course, Ukraine will claim that they've been able to push back Russia. Russia will claim that they've been able to get what they want. But at the end of the day, the casualty are the, general citizens of Ukraine who have lost loved ones, have their life disrupted because of this silly war that was not meant to start in the first instance.
Mr. Ogum.
Well, I'll say that I can't see Putin sitting down with Zelensky. He's made his position clear in the first instance. This guy's a clown president who has led his peoples into what we all agree has been an unnecessary full circle clownish war. We're back where we should have been in the first instance without a single fatality. I think the regret is the regret of all of us. When we think about the lives that we all struggled to save during the natural epidemic, that was not man-made, at least we hope it was not man-made. And we showed the best part of our humanity when everybody rallied together to save lives across the world, only for these idiots to now launch a war as soon as the COVID crisis is over, to launch a war in which man is just casually taking lives, the very lives that we're struggling to save. So it's a matter of regret, but I think this will probably be the end of NATO as well. And this gang up of nations for one purpose only, which is to make war.
Gentlemen, it's been a real pleasure speaking to both of you. Wish we had more time, but we can't talk about regrets. And, now that we're at, what we hope is the last lap of this war, with the negotiations going on, we hope you join us again when we have to discuss some more about this. Temitope Olodo, a pleasure having you. Dele Ogum, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And Marcia, I still have one question, and that is Ukraine. Are you saying that they remain a country that looks to Russia, that stays on their own without sovereignty,
they remain neutral,
integrity?
They remain neutral. That's what they've just said.
Okay. We'll come back to this issue, of course, when we return. The International Committee of the Red Cross is calling on Ukraine, Russia to agree on safe evacuations. We have more details in a moment. Stay with us.
Welcome back, and thanks for staying with us. The International Committee of the Red Cross has called on Ukraine and Russia to reach a clear agreement for the safe evacuation of civilians from the besieged southern Ukrainian city of Mariupol and other places as vital supplies run out.
Robert Mardini, ICRC Director General, says Ukraine and Russia must allow the ICRC to visit captured prisoners of war in line with the Geneva Conventions and return the remains of people killed in the conflict.
Concern today is the very intensity of the fighting, putting civilians in harm's way. The fact that in places like Mariupol, civilians are not able to live in safe conditions. There were no concrete agreement by parties to the conflict for safe evacuation of civilians, nor there has been green light to get humanitarian aid in, which is equally problematic. The ICRC can in no way participate or condone any deportation, any forced displacement. This is against the rules of war. This is against the Geneva Convention. The ICRC will not condone this. The ICRC will refuse and condemn any forced displacement. And this, unfortunately, is part and parcel of a deliberate, targeted misinformation and disinformation campaign that is targeting our impartial humanitarian work, that is putting at risk our teams on the ground. It is clear that there is a politicization of humanitarian work. This is not new to Ukraine, but the level, the magnitude of it is unprecedented. It is unacceptable. It is outrageous. It has to stop. What we know today is that it is deliberate and it is targeted against the work of ICRC, and it has an impact on the wider Red Cross Red Crescent movement, and ultimately it has an impact on civilians who won't be able to receive the help they need urgently today.
Well, the humanitarian aspect of this war has been one of the major issues since Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th. Still getting those numbers of people who have been displaced, who have moved into various countries around Ukraine and who are struggling to be settled in other nations. Joining us now is Executive Representative Nigeria in Diaspora, Romania. He's also Director, Diaspora 4040, Adeni Sanusi. Thank you for joining us. Also joining us is President, Nigerians in Diaspora Organization, Slovakia Chapter, and also Director, We Cares Africa, an NGO based in Slovakia, Josi Chinedu Ibe. Thank you for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Mr. Ibe, let's begin with you. It's been over a month since the invasion of Ukraine. What are your thoughts on the war now and how countries bordering Ukraine have seen an influx of refugees?
Yeah, thank you. I would say that it has really bothered us because the influx is much, about 3.5 million people, not only Ukrainians, also people from other parts of Africa, but the really bothering us, what is really bothering us is the African side. You know, the people from Africa, we are really, our brothers and sisters are really getting it really hard because the attention given to Ukrainians are not given to fellow Nigerians. And this is the areas which I know NATO as an organization have been trying hard to be able to help these our brothers and sisters to be able to settle them.
How is that so? Because from our understanding, there have been a lot of evacuations, from those neighboring countries. We've had evacuations from Romania, from even Slovakia, I believe, and Poland. And so many Nigerians have made that trip back home. But then there are others who are choosing to stay back. So when you're talking about the treatment of Nigerians, explain to us, I want to believe you're talking about those who decided to stay back in these other countries.
It's not just only those who decide to stay back, even those who are here, who already left. We got a lot of reports. Some of them are even in prison as I'm talking to you right now, even in Poland. And so, this treatment has been enormous, and we are also doing all we can to work with other authorities to see how we can help these our brothers and sisters. So, but this is clear. The assistance they are giving to them are not given to our brothers and sisters. For example, the accommodation, as soon as they come in, most of these guys and boys and girls have been cut out by NATO. 99% of them have been cut out as soon as they get out of the border. NATO takes care of it. So they get other nationalities. They give them accommodation. They give them all the assistance they need. For these are brothers and sisters. I must be honest with you. They are going through a lot of things which I think our government needs to look at.
Let me bring in Adeni Sanusi, who is the Executive Representative, NATO in Romania. What's your experience been, especially with Nigerians fleeing to Romania?
Okay, so thank you so much for having me. Pretty much the experience has been bittersweet in both ways, because from the beginning of the situation, it was very good to have had the Nigerian government intervention of evacuating many of these people who have come from Ukraine. So this evacuation was really massive. So to the point where a large number of the people who came from Ukraine to Romania were actually evacuated from Romania. And then the few of them that you have left, so those ones, there's intervention going on now with the Romanian government and then the Ministry of Education, because many of them are medical students. Many of them are students, actually. So they're trying to see how they can integrate them into the system. The Romanian government has offered to give many of these students work permits so that they can be able to work in Romania. And then for those ones who are studying, the possibility of integrating into the educational system in Romania as well. So this has been the situation so far so good. But a good part of it was the intervention by the Nigerian government to evacuate a large number of students, a large number of the refugees, the people who are fleeing from the war in Ukraine back to Nigeria. So this helped to actually save the day in terms of the casualties that we may have had at the end of the day. But the ones that are left, there is talks ongoing, and there is facilities ongoing as well from the Romanian government and from so many NGOs to see how they can be integrated into the system, and then how for the first instance, maybe 90 days to give them some 90-day stay, and then later to extend it to a 1-year period, pretty much. So that's what it has been so far.
So things appear to be a bit smoother in Romania, but are you still getting calls from people who might still be stuck in Ukraine?
Yes, there are still calls, there are still SOS, and then there are still people who are coming in to Romania. And then maybe I should also put it in context a little bit. For those ones who are actually students who are coming from Ukraine, many of them, Romania may not be their first country of choice. Even when they arrive in Romania, it's either they are evacuated, they go and they agree or admit to be evacuated back to Nigeria, or they want to move to other Schengen countries, because sometimes they look at the viability, the economic viability of the country where they want to integrate into. So if they can find their way to other countries, yes, they do. So that's why we have a few numbers of them that are left over who want to also integrate into the system here. But it may not be like the first choice for them to want to actually stay in Romania because of the economic viability of the country itself.
Mr. Ibe, did the Slovakian government promise assistance to anyone fleeing the war in Ukraine coming into Slovakia, not just Ukrainians?
I would say only Ukrainians. That is where they promised, and they are doing that. But when it comes to Nigerians, NATO as an organization has been taking care of that. What we do is we go to schools with the students. We try to help them with the donations we are having. We're trying to help them. But the situation is this, that as Mr. Sanusi just said, that they are given a working permit 90 days. It's not the situation here in Slovakia. The situation here in Slovakia is totally different, in the state that what they are doing now is how they can get their admitted into universities, and some of them have that admission, and we're also working hard how we can help them. Then others also who don't want to study, maybe some of them who were able to come in, we made it known to them that there's not much we can do to them, but only thing we can tell them is that they can go back to our country, and we try to motivate them. But I would say, as per your question, the Slovakian government did not provide any assistance to the.
So where does the Nigerian mission in Slovakia come in here? Because I haven't heard you talk about them. You say NATO is doing everything to help these people, but I want to believe that there is some partnership with the Nigerian embassy in Slovakia.
Yes, last time I come to the national television, I said it clear. Yeah, we have that collaboration, but what we had was promised, and they just promised us. Until now, nothing has been, no assistance from the embassy, and NATO has been taking care of over this under the leadership of Dr. Basu, our national chairman of NATO. Yeah.
Is it that you've been trying to contact them and you've not been getting any response in Slovakia?
Yeah, we had this meeting with the embassy. We have very good relationship, but the embassy is telling us that they are still waiting from the support from Nigeria. And we are still, if maybe Nigeria, they are listening to us now. If there's any support, they want to support our brothers and sisters who are also listening to us. Many of them are yet, they are lacking shelters, they are lacking food, they are lacking, and everyone knows that this situation really affects the situation here in Europe. Things are doubling prices, and that is the situation we are right now.
Mr. Ibe, what number is that? How many are students, how many Nigerians are with you that fled from Ukraine in Slovakia?
Yeah, in the first test, I know that the Slovakian government recorded 1,667, but when we did our own research with the embassy, what we recorded was 333 Nigerians, which we recorded. And most of them are here, and some of them also, they are other part of the country, and some of them also went to Australia and other parts. But most of them who are here, they are mainly students who are trying to see how they can get new admissions.
So what is the relationship, and this question is for you, Mr. Sanusi, what's the relationship between, these students, yourself, your organization, and then their parents back home? Are you all talking to each other?
Yes, so the relationship with the students and the parents and the organizations or embassies here in Romania, so far so good. I've had to talk to a few parents to calm their nerves and then to let them know that things are going to be, things are okay here, especially before the evacuation. So immediately after the evacuation of a large number of students, the pressure reduced pretty much. But what I can say pretty much with regards to the support that the embassy has actually offered, it's a little bit different maybe in Romania because the embassy are quite responsive. And then the major part of the evacuation, actually, I think it may have taken place, the major part of the evacuation may have taken place here in Romania because there are about 945 students or so who are evacuated from Romania. So pretty much the relationship and the connection and the interaction with the parents of these students and then and the embassy and also we are in the organization side or the association side has actually been stable. And then we also try as much as possible through NATO, through information that we get from NATO Central, with the help of Dr. Bashir Bashekola. We have been trying to also provide the information to these students so that they have, especially for the ones who are left over, the ones who want to actually stay and integrate. So we are providing consistent information to them so that they can make better choices and so that they don't become the casualty of a migration. They don't become, they don't begin to have migration problem because this is actually sometimes the exodus or the genesis of migration problems if a lot of things are not taken care of, especially for those ones who left without their identities, who left without their identity documents. This is going to be creating a lot of problems for them. And I believe that was why most of them were actually detained in some countries that they have been detained in. Because when you don't show up with your ID card or with your international passport, it becomes a problem.
Yeah, so you're talking to the parents, but what support are they giving you financially for their wards?
You mean the parents?
Yes, because they're their children. They still have to continue, if the children decide to continue their education somewhere else, then the parents are still responsible for them, even though you're helping them to settle in.
Okay, so pretty much the parents actually, they know that they are responsible to take care of the living expenses of their children because for those ones who are left over, like I said, the embassy actually let them know that since you didn't go with the evacuation, you may not be responsible for taking care of you anymore. So like that, the embassy actually lets them, and then they are taking responsibility of their accommodation, their living expenses, and then what we are on our side is actually to help them provide timely information, accurate information that will allow them, or that will ease their integration. So pretty much there is no need to actually get any support in terms of finances from their parents for anything because we are basically making sure that their stability and integration is made much more easier, except for those ones who actually have a need for accommodation.
You're handling, you're handling their finances, the students, their finances. You're the one handling them, not their parents.
No, their parents handle their finances, not we. Except for the ones that NATO is supporting from the NATO end, and also there's another diaspora relief. There's diaspora relief, an organization that's also helping to provide accommodation for some of these students and the ones who came from Ukraine. So this organization is also actually helping to provide finances to be able to take care of their short-term accommodation, but not long-term. So that means the parents are actually responsible for the long-term accommodation and the living expenses of the children.
So maybe I should direct my next question to Mr. Ibe, and that is the state in which the students and the Nigerians fleeing the war in Ukraine came to the border and then to Slovakia. Is there any sort of anything that you are doing, the organization, NATO, in terms of their mental health and then the integration, reintegration in other parts of Europe?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, we NATO, we are doing a lot because as soon as they get into our border, so what we do is we pick them from there and we direct them. It depends on the location. Some of them, majority of them are coming to Bratislava or Košice. So those who come to Bratislava, we organize like a motivation section where we motivate them, tell them, advise them what they need to do. We try to see exactly what is their what do they really need? For example, are they students? And if you're a student, so which area we can be able to help you? And some of them also, they say that they are looking for jobs. But when it comes to their state of health, it's not really okay because their mindset, maybe some of them came into some traumas. And what we do is trying to motivate them, do all we can as an organization, look for an accommodation for them. And also, we are providing feeding for them also. And also what we are doing also to help them is to go to these schools because most of them want to study, go to these schools to help them also to speak with them one-on-one with most of these schools. And they will be there in person hearing all what we're discussing. And the process we are now is helping them also to apply for these schools. Many of them have already applied and they already started getting admissions and also already started submitting their documents to Ministry of Education in Nigeria and also Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and that is the area. But what we do often is how we can be able to motivate them because that is really what they need. Because most of them, they don't want to go home and they are making it clear that they don't want to go. And when you ask them why, they said when they go home, what do we want them to be doing? So what we are doing here is just as an organization, not only NATO, We Care Africa, which is an NGO also, is also helping them on these areas also. So that is where we focus now, how we can be able to help these platforms and get admission and get back to school.
Also, briefly, Mr. Sanusi, this is also taking place in Romania?
Yes, just a little part of it, because like I said, from the onset, the government of Nigeria provided some help through the embassy, and then this help was actually for a short time. And then immediately the evacuation took place, there was not so much help provided from that point of view. So for the students who decided to stay back, they have some help from humanitarian organizations, different one, like the one I've mentioned earlier. But these are short-term relief, not a long-term, relief, pretty much. So it's not so much as it is happening in NATO, Slovakia. I think they are doing a great job there of providing all of these things for the students. So because there's, they also get a support from NATO Central, I believe. So for Romania here, what we try to do as much as possible is non-financial assistance that we provide. So not pretty much financial assistance like that.
All right, we'd like to thank you both for joining us. Adeni Sanusi, Executive Representative, NIDO Romania, and Josie Chinedu Ibe, President Nigerians in Diaspora Organization, Slovakia Chapter. Thank you both for joining us on the program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And still to come on the program, the UK orders its first ever detention of Russian businessman Superyacht in British waters. More details in a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back and thanks for staying with us. Amnesty International's Director for Eastern Europe, Marie Struthers, says the organization has been documenting attacks against civilians in Ukraine with the targeting by Russian forces of hospitals and schools. The rights group is releasing its annual report today in the shadow of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Struthers says Russia is allegedly repeating siege techniques used in the wars in Syria and in Chechnya, where civilians were indiscriminately targeted and where cluster ammunitions banned under international humanitarian law were being used.
Very sadly, what we're seeing in Ukraine today is pretty much a repeat of the tactics and plans that the Russian forces, and that we have documented very carefully over the years, have carried out in places like Syria, Chechnya, and to some extent Georgia. That means the use of siege techniques where civilians are indiscriminately targeted, including nursery schools, maternity hospitals, residential areas. And we're also seeing, very sadly, the use of cluster munitions and other weapons that are banned under international humanitarian law. So I can think of an incident, it was about the 13th of March, I think, in the east, I think it was the Kharkiv region, a small village, where there was a missile attack on a nursery school. A nursery school, can you believe it, where children and adults were sheltering. The missile left one child dead, another wounded, and 2 adults killed. We've also been documenting in various parts of the country attacks on hospitals that have left a civilian killed. I can tell you that last week, the United Nations, I believe it was the High Commissioner for Human Rights Office, documented at least 36 of such cases of what they called forced disappearances or abductions from occupied territories in Ukraine. If this is proven to be true, that is clearly a war crime and is absolutely prohibited under the Geneva Conventions.
And Russia says it would work out practical arrangements by Thursday for foreign companies to pay for its gas in rubles, raising the probability of supply disruptions as Western nations have so far rejected Moscow's demand for a currency switch. President Vladimir Putin's order last week to charge on friendly countries in rubles for Russian gas has boosted the currency after it fell to all-time lows when the West imposed sweeping sanctions against Moscow over its invasion of Ukraine. The move has drawn strong criticism from European countries which pay for Russian gas, mostly in euros, and say Russia is not entitled to withdraw contracts with the G7 nations rejecting Moscow's demands this week. European wholesale gas prices have made further gains this week and concerns about supply stopping. Russia has so far met its contractual obligations for gas supplies to Europe.
The UK has ordered its first ever detention of a superyacht in British waters. The British government says the £38 million yacht, named PHI, is owned by an unnamed Russian businessman, but that its ownership is deliberately well hidden. The Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, says the move is a clear and stark warning to Putin and his allies. The UK has already introduced a raft of sanctions against Russia following its invasion of Ukraine.
We have held this ship, which we now know belongs to a Russian oligarch, because we're very clear we cannot have any benefit to these oligarchs with close connections to Putin whilst that terrible war is going on in Ukraine and so many people are suffering. Yes, at the moment the individual's not sanctioned, but we know that the connection is there. I should say the ship was deliberately masked in very, very complex ownership structure, as if to deliberately try to deny the reality of it. Thanks to the work of the National Crime Agency and others, we tracked it down. We now know the connection. The ship won't be going anywhere for the time being, and that's because we take what Putin is doing in Ukraine incredibly serious. And people who have benefited from his regime cannot benefit from sailing around.
And Lithuanian President Gitanas Nausėda says NATO needs to fortify its eastern flank due to the very serious threat from Russia after its invasion of Ukraine. Nausėda says that that would include deploying more NATO troops to Baltic countries. Asked how NATO would respond if Russia were to use nuclear, chemical or biological weapons against Ukraine, the Latvian president replied, that would change the situation completely. They made the comments during an online event with Baltic presidents hosted by the Atlantic Council in Washington.
Member states that the use of nuclear, chemical or biological weapons against Ukraine, that would change the situation completely. And we would answer as the NATO member states, and this answer would be very strong. I cannot say which kind of answer, because we should not announce this answer in advance so that Russia can calculate with that. But it would be a very, very strong answer, and Russia would not be happy with this answer.
And we are facing very serious threat, because from the one side we have a border with Kaliningrad region. From the other side we have border with Belarus, which is already swallowed by Russia into the military system of Russian Federation, and it changes our military calculus.
We should go into this trap, but we start talking about what to do and what to give to Putin to end this war. Of course, we have to end this war, that's for sure, but not in any price or any case. So that's important to remember. And all these talks which are going on at the moment, I had a discussion this morning with our Russian ambassador to Estonia, who gave me the credentials, and we had this discussion, and I asked it.
Amid fears that Russian President Vladimir Putin could use nuclear weapons in his war against Ukraine, Nobel Peace Prize winning activist Beatrice Finn warns that the threat will never be eliminated unless the world denuclearizes. Ms. Finn, who's also executive director of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, based in Geneva, Switzerland, says the world has put itself in this situation by allowing nuclear weapons to remain. ICAN is a coalition of 468 grassroots non-governmental groups that campaign for a UN treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. It was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017. President Putin raised alarm last month when he ordered Russia's nuclear forces to be put on high alert after invading Ukraine.
It's quite scary right now, to be honest, even for someone like me who's worked in this issue for many years and warned about the increasing risk, and we've seen the signs that we're going in the wrong direction over the last 10 years. Yet I'm still a little bit in disbelief that this is where we are right now. But I also feel like we've put ourselves in this situation by allowing these weapons to remain. And this idea that 9 countries have them and the rest of the world just has to watch. It also means that he's using nuclear weapons and the threat to use nuclear weapons to enable the continued invasion of Ukraine. So we're almost sacrificing Ukrainians for deterrence theory, which is really absurd and unethical and awful, and it prevents us from helping people. So I really think that it's such a dangerous situation, and there's only one option. We cannot do this again.
Before we go, here's a recap of what's been happening today on talks. Now, Russia and Ukraine negotiators met for face-to-face talks in Istanbul, Turkey. Following the meeting, Russia's Deputy Defense Minister Alexander Fomin said Russia will drastically reduce combat operations in Kiev and Chernihiv areas in order to boost mutual trust. Ukraine's negotiators said it would adopt neutral status in return for security guarantees, meaning it would not join any military alliances such as NATO or host military bases. But Turkey said the moves mark the most significant progress since the war began. But Secretary of State Anthony Blinken says that he has not seen signs the talks between Ukraine and Russia are moving forward in an effective way because the US has not seen signs of real seriousness by Russia.
Also, a strike on a government building in the southern port city of Mykolaiv is said to have killed at least 7 people and injured 22 others. The city's governor, Vasily Kim, who posted a striking image of the damaged building, was not in the building at the time. He said he had overslept. UK's Ministry of Defence said Russian troops had been pushed back from a number of positions to the northwest of Kyiv.
That's our lineup this evening. Thank you for watching. I'm Millicent Walker.
And I'm Amarachi Ubani.